3 months had passed since the assembly that changed everything. Megan stood in the grand hall of the academy, surrounded by students and faculty from across the Galactic Union. Banners in dozens of colors hung from the ceiling, and soft music played from hidden speakers. It was the annual honor ceremony, the most important event of the academic year. She was wearing a simple dress that her mother had sent from Earth, dark blue with small silver stars embroidered along the hem. Her father had joked that it was appropriate for someone who lived among the stars now. Her brother had demanded to know if she was famous yet. She was not famous. But she was different from the nervous girl who had arrived on Orbital Prime all those months ago. She walked through the crowds with confidence now. Students greeted her by name. Faculty members nodded with respect as she passed. Zix found her near the refreshment table. His leafy hair had grown longer, and he seemed taller somehow, more sure of himself. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," Megan admitted. "I still do not know why they asked me to give a speech." Zix laughed softly. "Everyone knows why. You changed things. People think differently now because of you." Before Megan could respond, a familiar figure approached. Professor Vetherin walked toward her with slow, measured steps. His forearms were folded behind his back, and his yellow eyes held none of the cold hostility she remembered from her first days. "Miss Cole," he said, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Megan nodded and followed him to a quiet corner of the hall. They stood near a window that looked out at the stars. Two people from different worlds who had spent months as opponents. "I have something to say to you," the professor began. His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "It is not easy for me." He paused, and Megan waited. "When you first came to my class, I wanted you to fail. I believed that humans were inferior, that you had no place among the scholars of the Union. I designed challenges specifically to humiliate you. I hoped to prove that your species would never match the intelligence of the elder races." He lowered his gaze. "I was wrong, and not just about your abilities. I was wrong about why I felt that way." "What do you mean?" Megan asked gently. The professor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like shame. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Humans are new to the galaxy. You come from a world that should have killed you, but instead, it made you stronger. You think in ways we cannot predict. You solve problems that have defeated us for generations. I saw you as a threat to everything I believed about the order of things. He looked up and met her eyes. "Fear made me cruel. It made me blind. I am sorry." Megan felt a wave of emotion wash through her. This proud alien, this harsh teacher who had made her life so difficult, was standing before her and apologizing. It was more than she had ever expected. "Thank you, Professor," she said. "That means more than you know." Professor Vetherin nodded slowly. "You have a gift, Miss Cole, not just for mathematics, but for seeing the best in others, even when they do not deserve it. The galaxy needs more minds like yours." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small object. A pin in the shape of a star made from some metal that seemed to shift colors in the light. "This belonged to my teacher," he said. "She gave it to me when I graduated, many decades ago. She told me to give it to a student who changed the way I thought about the universe. I never found one. Until now." He pressed the pin into Megan's hand. "Keep it. And remember that even old fools like me can learn." Before Megan could respond, a chime sounded through the hall. Dean Callous' voice echoed from the speakers, calling everyone to attention for the ceremony. Megan took her seat in the front row. Zix sat beside her, practically vibrating with excitement. The hall was packed with hundreds of beings from across the galaxy, all watching as the dean took the stage. The ceremony began with awards for academic achievement, research breakthroughs, and service to the academy. Students walked across the stage to receive medals and certificates, their families watching proudly from the audience. Finally, Dean Callith raised his hands for silence. "We come now to the highest honor our academy can bestow," he said. "The Founder's Medal is given to a student who has not only excelled in their studies, but has fundamentally changed our understanding of what is possible." He smiled warmly. This year, the choice was clear. Megan Cole, please come forward. The hall erupted in applause as Megan stood. Her legs felt shaky as she walked to the stage, but she kept her head high. She climbed the steps and stood before the dean, who placed a golden medal around her neck. "Miss Cole," Dean Callith said, "you arrived here as a stranger from a world we barely understood. You faced prejudice and suspicion. You were called primitive and dangerous. But you responded not with anger, but with determination. You showed us that intelligence is not the property of any single species. You showed us that the universe is richer and stranger than we ever imagined." He stepped back and gestured to the podium. "Would you like to say a few words?" Megan approached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. She saw Zix grinning in the front row. She saw Professor Veth Aaron watching with an expression of quiet pride. She saw students from dozens of worlds, all waiting to hear what she would say. "Thank you," she began, "for this honor and for the chance to be here. When I first arrived at this academy, I was afraid. I thought I had to prove that humans were just as good as everyone else, that we deserved a place among the stars." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I have learned something during my time here. I do not think humans are superior. I do not think any species is superior. We are all different. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all see the universe in our own way." She looked at Professor Veth Aaron. "The greatest strength is not being the best at everything. It is being willing to learn from others. It is being open to ideas that challenge what we believe. It is admitting when we are wrong and trying to do better." The hall was completely silent, every eye fixed on her. "Humans are new to the galaxy," she continued. "We have much to learn from all of you. But maybe, just maybe, you have something to learn from us too. Not because we are special, but because we are different. And difference makes us all stronger." She stepped back from the podium. The hall remained silent for a long moment. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in. The applause grew until it filled the entire space, a thunderous sound that shook the banners hanging from the ceiling. Dean Callith returned to the stage. "Before we conclude, I have one more announcement. The Academy Council has voted to establish a new exchange program to bring more humans to study here. And we will be creating a Department of Human Studies, led by Professor Veth Aaron himself, to understand and share the unique methods of human cognition." The applause grew even louder. Later, after the ceremony ended, Megan stood near the window with Zix. They watched the stars glitter in the endless darkness. "What will you do now?" Zix asked. "Keep learning," Megan said. "Keep teaching. There is so much more to discover." Zix nodded slowly. "I would like to visit Earth someday, to see where you come from." Megan smiled. "You would be welcome. My parents would love to meet you. My brother would probably ask a million questions." Across the hall, she saw a group of students gathered around a holographic board. They were working on an equation together, a mix of species using different methods to find a common solution. A tall Kethvari was explaining something while a small Florian took notes. A Sundari pointed at a section of the equation and suggested a different approach. Professor Veth Aaron stood in the doorway, watching them with a small smile on his gray face. He caught Megan's eye and gave her a nod of acknowledgement that something had changed. Not just in the academy, but in the galaxy itself. A small crack had appeared in the wall of prejudice and fear that had kept species apart for so long. It was not much. It was not enough. But it was a beginning. Megan touched the star-shaped pen that Professor Veth Aaron had given her. It felt warm against her fingers, a reminder that even the hardest hearts could change. She did not know what the future held, but she knew that humans would face it together, alongside their new friends and allies among the stars. The journey was just beginning. 3 weeks after the incident with Tora, Dean Calith summoned Megan to his office. The dean was an elderly Cathvari with pale gray skin and eyes that had faded to a soft gold over centuries of life. He was the head of the mathematics department and one of the most respected scholars in the Galactic Union. His office was unlike Professor Veth Aaron's cramped space. It was large and open, with windows that looked out at the endless stars. Ancient books lined the walls, physical volumes that had survived from before the digital age. Megan had never seen so many real books in one place. "Please sit," the dean said warmly. His voice was gentle and curious. Nothing like the cold tone she had grown used to from his younger colleague. Megan sat in a chair that seemed to adjust itself to her body perfectly. "I have been watching your progress with great interest," Dean Calith continued. "Your performance in Professor Veth Aaron's class has been remarkable. But it is not just your ability to solve equations that fascinates me. It is how you solve them." The dean leaned forward, his 4 hands folded on the desk. "I would like to understand human cognition better. I have proposed a special assembly to the Academy Council, a demonstration of human problem-solving methods. Would you be willing to participate?" Megan felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. A demonstration. In front of the whole Academy. "What would I need to do?" she asked. "Simply show us how humans think," the dean said. "Explain your methods. Help us understand what makes your species unique." Megan thought about it. This could be an opportunity to change minds, to show everyone that humans were more than just survivors from a dangerous planet. But it could also go wrong. If she failed, if she made mistakes, it would confirm everything the skeptics believed. "I will do it," she said finally. The dean smiled, a warm expression that crinkled the skin around his eyes. "Excellent. The assembly will be held next week. I will send you the details." Megan left his office feeling both excited and terrified. She had 1 week to prepare for the most important presentation of her life. She spent every free moment working on her demonstration. Zix helped her practice, asking questions and offering feedback. She went through her notebooks, organizing her thoughts, trying to find the clearest way to explain concepts that she had always taken for granted. The night before the assembly, she could not sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, running through her presentation again and again. What if they did not understand? What if her explanations were too simple or too complex? What if Professor Veth Aaron interrupted her with difficult questions, designed to make her look foolish? She thought about her parents on Earth. Her mother had sent a message that evening, full of encouragement and love. Her father had written that he was proud of her no matter what happened. Her brother had sent a picture of a drawing he had made, a stick figure with wild hair standing on a space station, surrounded by aliens. He had written her name underneath it. Megan smiled in the darkness. She was not alone. Even across the vast distance of space, her family was with her. The assembly hall was enormous. Hundreds of seats rose in curved rows around the central stage. Holographic screens floated at strategic points so everyone could see clearly. By the time Megan arrived, the hall was already half full and more students and faculty were streaming through the doors. Dean Calith met her at the edge of the stage. "Are you ready?" he asked. "As ready as I can be," Megan said. The dean placed one of his 4 hands on her shoulder. "Remember, this is not a test. This is an opportunity to share knowledge. Speak from your heart, and they will listen." Megan stepped onto the stage and looked out at the sea of alien faces. She saw Zix near the front, his leafy hair bright green with nervous energy. She saw students from dozens of species, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. She saw Professor Veth Aaron sitting in the faculty section, his yellow eyes fixed on her with an expression she could not read. "Good morning," she began. Her voice sounded strange in the vast space, but the speakers carried it clearly to every corner of the hall. "My name is Megan Cole. I am human, and I am here to show you how my species thinks." She activated the holographic display behind her. A simple equation appeared, something basic that any student could solve. "When we see a problem," she said, "we do not always approach it directly. We look at it from different angles. We search for patterns. We ask ourselves if we have seen something similar before." She changed the display to show the equation from multiple perspectives, rotating it, breaking it into pieces, highlighting connections. Humans evolved on Earth, a world with high gravity, extreme temperatures, and millions of species competing for survival. Our ancestors had to make quick decisions with limited information. They had to recognize danger before it killed them. They had to find food and shelter and safety in an environment that was constantly trying to destroy them. She paused, letting the words sink in. This shaped our brains. We developed the ability to process vast amounts of information quickly. We learned to see patterns where others see chaos. We learned to trust our instincts, which are really just our minds working faster than we can consciously follow. She pulled up a complex equation, the same type that had stunned the class on her first day. "When I look at this, I do not see a single problem. I see many small problems connected together. I break them apart in my mind. I solve each piece. Then I put them back together." She began working through the equation, speaking aloud as she went. She explained each step, each choice, each shortcut. She showed how her method differed from the standard approach and why it often worked faster. When she finished, the room was silent. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled up a theoretical problem that had been mentioned in her research, a calculation related to faster-than-light travel that had puzzled HFY scientists for decades. "This problem has no known solution," she said. "But I would like to try something." A murmur ran through the audience. Professor Vetheran leaned forward in his seat. Megan studied the equation, letting her mind work the way it had always worked, finding patterns, making connections, jumping from one idea to another in ways that felt natural to her but looked strange to others. She began to write. The solution came slowly at first, then faster as the pieces fell into place. She was not even sure what she was doing half the time. Her hand moved almost on its own, guided by something deeper than conscious thought. When she stepped back, the board was filled with her work. The final answer glowed at the bottom, a simple expression that described a more efficient way to bend space. The room exploded with noise. Scientists stood and shouted. Students gasped and pointed. Dean Caliph rushed to the stage with wide eyes. "Is this correct?" someone yelled. A team of HFY scholars examined the work, their four hands moving frantically as they checked each step. Minutes passed. The hall grew quiet again, waiting. Finally, one of the scholars turned to face the audience. "The solution is valid," she announced. "The human has solved a problem that has defeated our best minds for 30 years. Chaos erupted. Students cheered. Faculty members argued. Zix jumped up and down in his seat, his leaves rustling with excitement. Professor Vetheran stood slowly. His face was pale, his yellow eyes wide with something that might have been shock or fear or wonder. He stared at Megan across the crowded hall, and for the first time, she saw no hostility in his expression. Only questions. Dean Caliph raised his hands for silence. "Today, we have witnessed something extraordinary. This young human has shown us that intelligence is not limited to certain species or certain methods. It takes many forms. And sometimes the most valuable insights come from the places we least expect." He turned to Megan with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Miss Cole. You have given us much to think about." Megan nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had done it. She had shown them what humans could do. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she knew this was just the beginning. The real work of changing minds and building bridges would take much longer. One demonstration could not erase centuries of prejudice and misunderstanding. Still, it was a start. And every long journey began with a single step. The days that followed were difficult in ways Megan had not expected. Word of her performance spread across the academy like fire. Students she had never met stopped to stare at her in the corridors. Some whispered about luck or tricks. Others wondered if humans were more dangerous than anyone had realized. A few brave souls approached her with questions about Earth, about her methods, about how she had learned to think the way she did. Professor Veteran did not accept her success. Each class brought new challenges, harder equations, more complex problems. He called her to the board again and again, always watching with those cold yellow eyes, always waiting for her to fail. But Megan did not fail. She solved an energy distribution problem in 9 minutes while the professor stood with his arms crossed. She completed a dimensional mapping calculation that made Zix gasp with admiration. She worked through a theoretical particle behavior model that left even the older students shaking their heads in disbelief. After 2 weeks, Professor Vetheran called her to his office. The room was small and filled with floating screens that displayed equations and star charts. The professor sat behind a simple desk, his 4 hands folded in front of him. He did not invite Megan to sit. "I have been reviewing your work," he said. His voice was cold but controlled. "Your methods are unorthodox. They are not taught anywhere in the galaxy. And yet they produce correct results." Megan stood straight and met his gaze. "Is that a problem, Professor Dodd?" "It is a question." He leaned forward slightly. "How do humans think? What is different about your minds that allows you to approach problems in ways we have never considered?" Megan thought carefully before answering. "Humans evolved on a dangerous world. We had to solve problems quickly to survive. Our brains learned to find patterns, to make connections, to jump from one idea to another without always following the standard path. We call it intuition, but it is really just a different kind of logic." The professor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I have been teaching for 30 years. I have seen brilliant minds from dozens of species, but I have never seen anyone solve problems the way you do." "It is disturbing." Why? Megan asked. "Because it suggests that we have been wrong about many things." He stood and walked to one of the floating screens. "The Union has always believed that certain species are naturally superior in certain areas. Kefvari in mathematics, Sundari in strategy, Florians in biology. Humans were classified as physically capable, but intellectually limited. You are proving that classification wrong. Maybe the classification was never right to begin with," Megan said quietly. Professor Vetheran turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. "Perhaps, but do not think this changes anything between us. I will continue to test you. I will continue to push you. And if you fail even once, I will use it as proof that humans do not belong here." "I understand," Megan said. "I will not fail." She left his office feeling strange. The conversation had been almost civil, almost like a discussion between equals. But she knew better than to trust it. The professor was not her friend. He was a man trying to protect everything he had believed his whole life. The next day, Tora made his move. Megan arrived at the lecture hall to find her usual seat occupied. Tora sat there with a smile on his sharp face, his silver eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "I believe this is my seat now," he said loudly. "Unless the human wants to challenge me for it." Megan looked at him calmly. "Keep the seat. I will find another." She started to walk past him, but he grabbed her arm. "Not so fast." I want everyone to hear this. I have proof that you have been cheating." The room went quiet. Students turned to watch. Even Professor Vetharan, who had just entered, stopped at the edge of the platform. "What proof?" Megan asked. Tora stood and held up a datapad. "I traced your communications. You have been receiving messages from Earth every night. You send them descriptions of our equations, and they send back the answers. You are not solving anything yourself." Megan felt a cold wave of shock. She did receive messages from Earth every night, but they were from her parents, asking about her day, telling her they loved her, sending pictures of home. Nothing about mathematics. Nothing about cheating. "That is not true," she said. Then explain the messages, Tora demanded. "Why do you communicate with Earth so often if not to cheat?" "Because they are my family," Megan said. Her voice was steady despite the anger building inside her. "I talk to my parents. I tell them about my classes. They tell me about home. That is all," Tora laughed. "A convenient excuse. But I do not believe you. And I do not think anyone else should either." He looked around the room, seeking support. A few students nodded. Others looked uncertain. Professor Vetharan stepped forward. "This is a serious accusation. If true, it would mean immediate expulsion." He looked at Megan with those cold, yellow eyes. "Can you prove your innocence?" Megan thought quickly. She could show them the messages, but that would mean exposing her private conversations with her family. It would mean letting these strangers read her mother's words of encouragement and her father's silly jokes. It felt like a violation, but she had no choice. "I can show you the messages," she said. "All of them. There is nothing about mathematics in any of them." She pulled out her own datapad and transferred the files to the main screen. The holographic display lit up with message after message from Earth. Her mother asking if she was eating enough. Her father sending a picture of their dog. Her younger brother complaining about his homework. Small, ordinary human things. The room was silent as the messages scrolled past. Some students looked embarrassed. Others looked confused. Tora's face grew pale as he realized his accusation was falling apart. When the last message appeared, Professor Vetharan turned to Tora. "It seems your proof is worthless. These are personal communications with no academic content whatsoever." She could have deleted the evidence, Tora said desperately. She could have hidden the real messages. Enough. The professor's voice was sharp. "You have made an accusation you cannot support. You have wasted the time of this entire class. You will apologize to the human." Tora's face twisted with rage. "I will not apologize to a primitive creature from a death world. Then you will leave my classroom," Professor Vetharan said coldly. "And you will not return until you learn to behave with the dignity expected of a Sindari scholar." Tora stood frozen for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. Then he grabbed his things and stormed out of the room. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss. Professor Vetharan turned to Megan. "I apologize for the disruption. Please, take your seat." Megan nodded and found a spot next to Zix. The Florian looked at her with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" he whispered. "I am fine," Megan said. But inside she was shaking. Not from fear, but from anger. She had done nothing wrong. She had worked hard, studied hard, and earned her place here through her own efforts. And still they tried to tear her down. She looked at Professor Vetharan, who had begun his lecture as if nothing had happened. For a moment their eyes met. The professor gave her the smallest nod, so slight that she might have imagined it. Maybe things were starting to change. Maybe some of them were beginning to see her as more than just a human from a dangerous world. Maybe they were starting to see her as a real student worthy of respect. But she knew the fight was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more people who wanted her to fail. She would face them all, because that was what humans did. They survived, they adapted, and they never, ever gave up. Megan did not sleep well that night. She lay in her small bed and stared at the ceiling while equations danced behind her eyes. She thought about everything she had learned on Earth, all the years of study and practice that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the way Professor Vetheran had looked at her, like she was an insect that had somehow crawled into his classroom. She got up before dawn and sat at her desk with her notebook. She reviewed the concepts from the lecture, writing them out in her own way, translating the alien notation into something that made sense to her human brain. By the time the station's artificial sun began to glow through her window, she felt ready. The lecture hall was fuller than the day before. Word had spread about the challenge, and students from other classes had come to watch. They filled the upper rows, whispering and pointing at the seats below. Most of them were looking at Megan Dodd. She took her usual seat near the back. Zick sat next to her, his leafy hair trembling with nervous energy. "Everyone is watching," he said quietly. "They want to see what happens." "I know," Megan replied. "Let them watch." Professor Vetheran entered the room with the same slow, deliberate steps as before. His forearms were folded across his chest, and his yellow eyes gleamed with something that looked like anticipation. "Good morning," he said. "Today we begin the challenge. Students will come to the board one at a time and solve the equation I present. You will have as much time as you need, but understand that speed matters. The longer you take, the more it reveals about your limitations." He paused and smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. "We will begin with our newest student, the human. Please come forward." The room fell completely silent. Megan felt hundreds of eyes on her as she stood and walked down the steps to the platform. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her face calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She stood before the holographic blackboard, its blue glow casting strange shadows across her face. Professor Vetheran moved beside her. "This equation is a multivariable quantum probability calculation. It describes the likelihood of particle behavior across 4-dimensional planes. Most students at your level require 20 minutes to solve it. Let us see how long it takes you." He waved his hand, and the equation appeared on the board. It was massive, stretching across the entire surface, filled with symbols and numbers that seemed to twist and overlap in impossible ways. Megan heard gasps from the audience. Even Zix made a small sound of distress, but Megan just looked at it. She let her eyes move across the equation slowly, taking in each part, each relationship, each hidden pattern. On Earth, she had spent years learning to see mathematics differently than most people. Her teachers had called it intuition, but it was really just practice. She had trained her brain to find shortcuts, to see connections that others missed. She noticed something strange about the notation. Some of the symbols were different from what she had learned on Earth, but the underlying logic was the same. She just needed to translate. "May I ask a question, Professor?" she said. The professor raised what might have been an eyebrow. "If you must. This symbol here." Megan pointed to a curved shape near the middle of the equation. "On Earth, we use a different mark for dimensional constants." "Is this the same concept?" Professor Vetheran looked surprised for just a moment before his face returned to its cold expression. "Yes, it represents the fixed value of dimensional space. Your people use a different notation." "How primitive." "Thank you," Megan said. She turned back to the board. She began to work. Her hand moved across the holographic surface, writing her own symbols beneath the alien ones. She did not try to solve the equation the way the professor expected. Instead, she used a method she had learned from her favorite teacher back on Earth, an old woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had spent 40 years teaching mathematics to students who everyone else had given up on. Mrs. Patterson had taught Megan to look at problems sideways, to find the simple truth hiding inside the complex appearance. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the holographic board. Minutes passed. Megan kept working, filling the board with her neat handwriting, breaking the massive equation into smaller pieces, solving each piece separately, and then combining them at the end. 7 minutes after she started, she wrote the final answer and stepped back. Done. She said. Professor Veteran stared at the board. His yellow eyes moved across her work, following each step, checking each calculation. His forehands tightened into fists at his sides. The answer is correct, he said finally. His voice was flat and hard. The room exploded with noise. Students whispered and shouted and pointed at Megan. Some of them looked angry. Others looked confused. A few, like Zix, looked amazed. How did you do that so fast? Someone called out. Professor Veteran raised his hands for silence. The method you used. I do not recognize it. What is this? Megan looked at her work on the board. It is called decomposition analysis. We developed it on Earth about 300 years ago. It allows us to break complex problems into simple components and solve them individually. The professor stepped closer to the board, studying her work with intense focus. This is not in any of our textbooks. This is not how mathematics is taught in the Union. Different worlds develop different methods, Megan said quietly. Humans had to figure things out on our own. We did not have access to galactic knowledge, so we found our own paths. Professor Vetherin turned to face her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. It might have been curiosity or respect, but it was gone before Megan could be sure. Return to your seat, he said. We will continue with other students. Megan walked back up the steps to her place next to Zix. The Florian grabbed her arm with his soft green fingers. That was incredible, he whispered. I have never seen anything like it. You solved in 7 minutes what takes others 20 or more. Megan smiled slightly. I just did it differently. That is all. The challenge continued. Other students came to the board, one by one. Some solved their equations quickly. Others struggled. A Sindari student named Tora took 15 minutes and made 2 mistakes that the professor corrected with sharp words. When Tora returned to his seat, he looked at Megan with open hostility in his silver eyes. At the end of the class, Professor Vetherin stood on the platform with his arms crossed. Today's results were interesting, he said. Some of you performed as expected. Others did not. He paused and glanced at Megan. The human completed the challenge faster than any student I have tested in 10 years of teaching this course. Whispers filled the room again. However, the professor continued. One success does not prove anything. It could be luck. It could be that the particular equation suited her primitive methods. We will continue to test in the coming weeks. We will see if this performance can be repeated. He dismissed the class with a wave of his hand. Megan gathered her things and walked toward the door. She felt eyes on her from every direction. Some students moved out of her way as she passed. Others stared with expressions she could not read. Tara stepped into her path, blocking her exit. His silver eyes were narrow with anger. That was a trick, he said. You must have seen that equation before. You cheated somehow. Megan looked up at him calmly. He was taller than her, with sharp features and a proud stance. He was not used to being outperformed. I did not cheat, she said. I just solved it. Tora leaned closer. I do not know how you did it, human, but I will find out. And when I do, everyone will see that your kind does not belong here. He pushed past her and walked away. Zix appeared at her side. Do not worry about him. Tora is always angry when someone does better than him. He comes from a family of scholars. He thinks he is superior to everyone. I am not worried, Megan said. But she watched Tora disappear down the corridor with a thoughtful expression. She had made an enemy today. But she had also proven something important. Humans could compete with the best minds in the galaxy. They just needed the chance to show what they could do. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges. Megan was ready to face them all. The shuttle docked at Orbital Prime with a soft hum, and Megan Cole felt her stomach twist with nerves. She pressed her face against the small window and stared at the massive space station that would be her home for the next year. Thousands of lights blinked across its surface like stars trapped in metal. Ships of every shape and size moved around it, carrying students from dozens of worlds she had only read about in books. She was 19 years old, and the first human ever accepted into the Galactic Academy of Sciences. Earth had joined the Galactic Union only 5 years ago, and most aliens still thought of humans as primitive creatures from a dangerous world. They called Earth a death world because of its harsh gravity, extreme weather, and countless predators. To them, humans were survivors, but not thinkers. Megan grabbed her single bag and walked down the ramp into the arrival hall. The ceiling rose so high above her that she could barely see it. Aliens of all kinds moved through the space, some walking on 2 legs like her, others floating or crawling or moving in ways she could not describe. Their colors ranged from deep blue to bright orange to pale silver. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few seemed to be made of something like living crystal. Nobody looked at her with welcome. A few glanced her way and then quickly looked somewhere else. She heard whispers in languages her translator chip could not fully catch. She caught only fragments. Deathworlder. Primitive. Why is it here? She kept walking. A tall alien with 4 arms and gray skin stood near the registration desk. He wore the dark robes of a professor, and his eyes were cold and yellow. He watched Megan approach with an expression that she could only describe as disgust. This was Professor Veth Aaron of the Kethvari species. She had read about him during her preparation. He was considered one of the finest mathematical minds in the galaxy. He was also known for his harsh teaching methods and his belief that only certain species were capable of true intelligence. Humans were not on his list. Megan registered her name and received her room assignment and class schedule. The clerk, a small green being with large eyes, handed her a datapad without meeting her gaze. "Welcome to the academy," the clerk said in a flat voice. "Your first class is tomorrow morning. Advanced Mathematical Theory with Professor Veth-Aaron. Of course, it was. Megan found her room in a quiet corner of the student housing block. It was small but clean, with a bed that adjusted to her body and a window that looked out at the stars. She sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. She had worked so hard to get here. She had passed every test, written every essay, and proven herself in ways that no human had ever done before. But none of that seemed to matter to the people on the station. She thought about her mother back on Earth, who had cried when Megan told her about the acceptance. She thought about her father, who had held her hands and told her to make them see, make them understand what humans can do. She would try. The next morning, Megan walked into the lecture hall and found a seat near the back. The room was shaped like a half circle, with rows of seats rising up from a central platform where the professor would stand. A massive holographic blackboard floated behind the platform, glowing with soft blue light. Students filled the seats around her. She saw Kethvari with their 4 arms and gray skin. She saw Florians with their plant-like bodies and gentle faces. She saw Sindari with their sharp features and proud postures. She saw species she had never encountered before, and all of them seemed to know each other. They talked and laughed and shared stories about their home worlds. Nobody talked to her. A small Florian with leaves for hair sat down next to her. He looked nervous, his green fingers tapping against the desk. "Is this seat taken?" he asked quietly. Megan shook her head. "No. Please sit." The Florian settled into the seat and glanced at her. "I am Zix. You are the human." "Yes." "I have never seen a human before." "I am Megan." Nice to meet you, Zix. Zix nodded slowly. The others say humans are dangerous. They say you come from a world that kills most creatures before they can grow. Is that true? Megan thought about it. Earth is difficult, but it made us strong. It made us adapt. Before Zix could respond, the room fell silent. Professor Veth Aaron walked onto the platform with slow, deliberate steps. His forearms were clasped behind his back, and his yellow eyes swept across the students like searchlights. "Welcome to Advanced Mathematical Theory," he said. His voice was deep and cold. "This course is not for the weak-minded. It is not for those who cannot keep pace. Many of you will fail. That is expected." He paused and looked directly at Megan. She felt his gaze like a weight on her chest. "I see we have a new species joining us this year," he continued. "A human from the death world called Earth. I have studied humans briefly. They are known for their physical endurance and their survival instincts. They are not known for their intellectual achievements." A few students laughed softly. Megan kept her face still. The professor turned to the blackboard. "Nevertheless, the Academy has decided to allow this experiment. We shall see how long it lasts." He began the lecture, writing equations on the holographic board with movements of his hands. The symbols were complex and unfamiliar, a mix of numbers and shapes that seemed to twist and turn in ways that hurt Megan's eyes at first. But she watched carefully, and slowly the patterns began to make sense. She pulled out a small notebook and a pen. It was old technology, something the other students would consider primitive. But Megan found that writing by hand helped her think. It connected her brain to the information in a way that typing on a datapad never did. The Sindari, student in front of her, turned around and stared at the notebook with wide eyes. "What is that?" he whispered. "Are you drawing?" "Writing," Megan said quietly. "Taking notes." The Sindari made a sound that might have been a laugh and turned back around. Professor Vetheran noticed the exchange. He stopped his lecture and looked at Megan. "Is there a problem, human? Is my teaching too advanced for your primitive tools?" "No, Professor," Megan said calmly. "I am following along. Are you? Then perhaps you can tell me the base principle behind the equation I just wrote." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Megan. She looked at the equation on the board, a long string of symbols that described the relationship between energy and dimensional space. She had seen something similar in her studies on Earth, though the notation was different. "The base principle is that energy exists in multiple states simultaneously until observed or measured," she said. "The equation describes the probability of each state based on the dimensional constants involved." Professor Vetheran stared at her for a long moment. His yellow eyes showed nothing. "Correct," he said finally. He turned back to the board. "As I was saying," Zix leaned close to Megan. "That was amazing," he whispered. Megan said nothing. She just kept writing in her notebook. At the end of the lecture, Professor Vetheran made an announcement. "Tomorrow we will have a challenge. I will present equations of increasing difficulty. Students will solve them at the board. This will show me who belongs in this class and who does not." He looked at Megan one more time. "I suggest everyone prepare carefully." Megan walked out of the lecture hall with Zix beside her. The other students gave her strange looks, a mix of confusion and something that might have been respect. Or maybe fear. She did not care what they thought. She was here to learn, and she was here to prove something. Not just for herself, but for every human who would come after her. Tomorrow would be the real test.